second guest speaker. Okay. All right. I'm gonna let Nick take it away then. All right. There you go.
Thanks, Elijah.
Welcome.
And hey, everybody who's on the call. Thanks for coming on. Oh, what's up, Brian? I see family. I see neighbors. Elijah, I only just met virtually yesterday. Oh, shoot, I see colleagues. Hey, Tom. Good to see y'all. Thank you so much for joining. Happy MLK Day to you, first of all. I hope you've been having a meaningful one so far. I hope you were able to catch Aaron Ike's last presentation because it was definitely substantial and meaningful. He was excellent.
Yeah.
I'm going to be talking about some things that have some overlap and some things that are different from Aaron. But before I do want to point out that I got dressed up for this. That's not only to say thank you to Elijah and to Scott Terry and to the whole Mahogany Gallery family, you know, to show honor that I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you all today. But it's also just because you almost never see a photograph of Dr. King not in a shirt and tie and a suit jacket. And aside from that, so I usually wear, I don't typically wear a suit and tie, but just about every Dr. King Day, I try to do that. And it used to be the suit that I got married in. I'm in an interracial relationship, and so that was just a way for me to be thinking of Dr. King and other ancestors who have made it easier for my wife and I to be in relationship with each other in a comfortable way in the society. But I'm wearing a different one today, partially because it has a Dr. King quote.
Oh, that's nice.
Inside pocket. Won't get deep on. Elijah, you just so you know, you're still unmuted, so you may check that.
Okay.
So Scott, when Scott first reached out to me, he was like, "Can you do an hour talk?" And I was like, "No one wants me to do an hour talk. My mother would not come if I were doing an hour talk." So I said, like, how about like a half of that? So this talk is just a little under half an hour, and then we can maybe talk in community together. But because this is being put on by an artist and an art gallery, and because I think the name of the event is the second annual MLK Creative Day of Service, which I really like that. You know, we see days of service for MLK Day really regularly. I don't know that I've ever seen a creative day of service specifically, which I know stood out to Aaron Ike also. But because of that, I've tried to focus my talk on creativity. Dr. King hugely valued creativity, and he talked about it all the time. So it was kind of easy to have that overlap. So I titled this talk, Dr. King and the Lineage of Creative Extremists. As Scott billed me, you know, Scott invited me to just talk about the more radical side of Dr. King, the more extreme side of Dr. King, some of his philosophies. So I'm doing that, but I'm also talking about lineage and talking a little bit about creativity. So the talk starts with a quote from a 1967 speech of his, which Aaron also mentioned. The speech is called The Three Evils. And the quote from Dr. King is, "There is a need now more than ever before for men and women in our nation to be creatively maladjusted. And I say to you that I choose to be among the maladjusted." That's incredibly beautiful to me. So, okay, Dr. King and the lineage of creative extremists. Martin Luther King Jr. has been stolen from us. His legacy has been erased and replaced with a softer, gentler, sanitized hologram of the man. Every year we have celebrations throughout the country supposedly in honor of him. But how can you honor a person you don't really know, whom you've been lied to about your whole life? I'm talking about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. We must say it in whole from time to time to remind ourselves who the man was. Reverend. He was a pastor, a minister, and a spiritual revolutionary. And he specifically was a radical Christian. Christianity was his tradition. To talk about Dr. King without talking about Jesus would be to paint a woefully incomplete portrait of the man, as he constantly reminded readers of his own writings that these ideas were not new, and he was often just taking the teachings of Jesus or others and putting them into modern context. Then there is doctor, a word which is derived from the Latin word for teacher, and what a teacher he was. This reminds us that the man was a devotee of education. He was an academic, an intellectual, and had earned a doctorate. He was not just a pastor, but also a theologian, and cared not just about the supernatural world of spirituality, but also the empirical world of science and knowledge. And then junior, a moniker which indicates this is someone in a lineage. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was all about lineage, and therefore so am I. I believe we all must be if we are to truly honor King. His religion was a way to identify with a spiritual lineage, the lineage of Christianity. His academic title, doctor, identified him as part of a lineage of thinkers, scholars, and people who valued human thought as highly as possible and as a spiritual practice itself. But Dr. King had another incredibly important lineage that overlapped with his other identities, the lineage of a justice worker, the lineage of those who have rejected comfort and popularity throughout time in favor of standing for truth, righteousness, and equitable treatment of all, especially the most vulnerable among us. This is what I believe we're called to do every year on this day, to engage in this lineage, to nurture ourselves into this lineage of justice workers, and to learn from our ancestors what that means and what we must do to be worthy of such a lineage. So why in the world is it so difficult on a day named after this incredible radical person to learn anything about him? It would be like me coordinating a birthday party for my wife every year, but never inviting my wife or allowing her to come. And so no one who comes to the parties ever actually gets to know her. How do we reclaim one of our ancestors whose legacy has been bastardized and whose teachings and truth have been whitewashed since the very day that he was murdered? In the Gospel of John, Jesus says, "Only the Spirit quickeneth, the flesh profiteth nothing." He then goes on, "These words I speak unto you, they are spirit and they are life." I believe this to be an utterly core teaching of Jesus, that words are spirit, are vehicles for spirit, and that we can transfer our spirits to one another via our words, whether that be a creative, life-giving spirit or a destructive, death-producing spirit. That if there is someone we don't know whom we want to know, we typically get to know their spirit through listening to their words. And if that's true, then one way that we can reclaim the legacy of an ancestor who has been stolen from us, like Dr. King, is by going to their words. I believe Dr. King understood this as he painstakingly distilled his spirit into words in countless writings, speeches, and sermons that we still have access to today. This is how we re-invite Dr. King to his own birthday celebrations again. We reintroduce the spirit of Dr. King into these events by reintroducing his words. Why this doesn't already happen, I have no idea. Why so many would decide to host events in memoriam of one of the most insightful humans to ever live, but then to not really include any of his actual insights is a bit beyond me. Recently, I attended a Dr. King event that had a Dr. King impersonator who, while doing an excellent job of looking like and sounding like the man, the impersonator chose to simply make up his own remarks rather than reciting one of Dr. King's speeches. This flabbergasts me. It is already too much that we host these events and then never bring Dr. King's words into them. That would be like having a national holiday for broccoli where we just have people talk about broccoli who don't know much about it, but we never eat any broccoli. But then to bring in a Dr. King impersonator who has the boldness to create his own monologue while impersonating Dr. King, rather than just delivering one of the countless earth-shattering orations we have from the man himself. It would be like if we engineered an imitation broccoli out of sugar and Crisco and food coloring and decided we should eat that on National Broccoli Day rather than delight in the real, infinitely more substantial and nutritious thing itself. I believe the reason why Dr. King's teachings are so absent from our Dr. King events is because Dr. King's teachings are challenging, they're disturbing, they're unsettling. They would indict the very institutions and individuals hosting the events. Because we want these events to be popular, politically safe, and non-controversial, we are obligated to disinvite Dr. King and his words from them, as he was often unpopular, politically volatile, and extremely controversial. We have chosen comfortability for these events above authenticity. And because the truth of Dr. King's teachings is an inconvenient one for these purposes, we are left with no choice but to disinvite him from the party with his very name on it. The great news is, all of this is easily remedied by simply going back to Dr. King's words, where we find that docile, demure image we have been sold of the man is like a photographic negative of the actual man himself. I think for the purposes of this talk, his letter from a Birmingham jail is a great place to start, which Aaron also referenced, because the letter itself is relatively short, and basically it's a response to his unpopularity and his being accused of controversiality. The letter is addressed generally to "my dear fellow clergymen." So one might think that it would be a letter to some of Dr. King's greatest supporters. For where could any of us find a single church today that would openly admit to opposing or rejecting the teachings and legacy of Martin Luther King Jr.? But this is not the case. It's quite the opposite. Dr. King is writing this letter in response to public criticism his fellow clergymen collectively and publicly have made of him and his associates for coming to Birmingham to fight for justice there. He quotes them in calling his activities unwise and untimely, and notes that they see him and his associates as outsiders coming in. He responds initially by explaining that some of their affiliate justice organizations requested that he and others from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference come and help in their fight against the injustices local to Birmingham. He concludes, "I, along with several members of my staff, am here because I was invited here. I am here because I have organizational ties here." But then he pivots from giving a sort of logistical answer to a more spiritually jurisdictional answer. But more basically, he says, "I am in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the prophets of the 8th century BC left their villages and carried their 'Thus saith the Lord' far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to the far corners of the Greco-Roman world, so am I compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my own hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call." Here, King is again expertly contextualizing himself in a lineage that the addressees of this letter, his fellow clergymen, would also claim to be a part of. So King brings immediate indictment upon them by simply referencing this history they all agree is holy? If that is truly the lineage they value, why are they denouncing crossing geographic boundaries for higher purposes in the present day, as it is being carried out by Dr. King and his cohorts? He continues, moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow provincial outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. At this point, Elijah, if you're able to make me the host, I might share my screen in a moment. So when I read these lines, I am struck, as I often am with reading King's words, at how utterly contemporary they feel. It seems like he could have written this yesterday, responding to criticisms of Black Lives Matter protesters. In fact, if you live in Racine, Kenosha, or some of the surrounding areas, your own congressional representative, Brian Stile, used the very phrase Dr. King says we can never again afford, outside agitators, when he was denouncing a Black Lives Matter protest that happened in Racine County at a Burlington school board meeting just months ago. This protest was organized by our friend in Burlington, Darnisha Garbade, and her Burlington Coalition for Dismantling Racism. And like with King, any people who joined them from beyond that community only did so because they were invited by Darnisha and the coalition. Congressman Stile is participating in a long lineage as well when he evokes this term, a lineage of racist suppression of what Dr. King once called the right to protest for right. I'm going to see if I can share my screen really quickly, because I want to actually show you this little 2-minute clip of Congressman Brian Stile on Fox News. So let's see how willing the technology gods are to let us do that. It's just about 2 minutes. I just want to check, can people hear that?
No.
Nobody can hear that? Okay. We're going to thank you for letting me know, Brian. We will bypass that then if the audio isn't coming through. Sorry that I can't share that with you. So I'll just jump back into the talk. This is why when I say Dr. King is a radical, I don't mean it in the past tense. Absolutely, his teachings and beliefs were radical over half a century ago when he was alive, but the reality is, for better or worse, they are largely just as radical today. And the forces wishing to uphold the status quo and suppress justice movements are frankly still using these same arguments for why pushes for racial and economic justice should be dismissed, not tolerated, or even violently crushed. In some ways, it's actually very liberating to learn this, because it means that perhaps every argument people have against the movement for Black lives and every justice movement today were the same arguments Dr. King already eviscerated in writings like this letter, which he wrote in 1963. If we're looking for counter arguments, we need only to go to his words, and we will find the counter arguments we desire prescribed for us practically verbatim. Dr. King so thoroughly slays his critics' arguments in this letter that sometimes I feel like a better title for the letter might be something like Letter in Which I Drench My Haters in Shade. But despite the fact that Dr. King is obliterating their arguments, he is not doing so out of the impulse to shame them for their misguidedness. In the book of Revelation, it says, "As many as I love, I rebuke and chasten." Dr. King is rebuking and chastening his fellow clergy because he loves them, and it hurts him to see them working largely unwittingly as agents of injustice, not even knowing that they do. He is trying to blast their sensibilities back to consciousness. In the next paragraph, he says, "You deplore the demonstrations taking place in Birmingham. But your statement, I am sorry to say, fails to express a similar concern for the conditions that brought about those demonstrations. I am sure that none of you would want to rest content with the superficial kind of social analysis that deals merely with effects and does not grapple with underlying causes. It is unfortunate that demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham, but it is even more unfortunate that the city's white power structure left the Negro community with no alternative." Wow, that is some expert level shade. This counter argument Dr. King is laying out now is a radical lesson that justice workers of this century need to tattoo on their hearts, in my opinion. If it's not relevant today, I don't know what is. In the wake of every major Black Lives Matter related protest, we see so many people, especially, but definitely not exclusively white people, raging indignantly against the demonstrations. Much like you would have seen if I was able to play the video of Representative Style being interviewed on Fox News, both he and the interviewer. Righteous indignation at the demonstrations. They're outraged by the demonstrations, their interruptiveness. They demand peace and order, but those same people are unanimously silent every day in the face of outrageous systemic injustice against BIPOC people, queer people, poor people, and others. Excuse me 1 second. Now that I'm the host, I'm letting people into the waiting room. So this is the modern manifestation of what King addresses directly in his 1962 letter when he refers to a, quote, obnoxious negative peace. He declares that there are two kinds of peace. He says that he believes, quote, the Negro's great stumbling block, and this is something Aaron also mentioned in his talk. The Negro's great stumbling block in his stride toward freedom is not the Ku Klux Klaner or other avowed racists, but it is the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with the methods of direct action you use, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by a mythical concept of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait for a more convenient season. Dr. King then concludes, shallow understanding from people of goodwill is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. These words are like a balm to my soul. To read the words of an ancestor whom I will never meet in the flesh, only in the spirit through his words, and to see his frustrations with the exact same things that I and my contemporary justice workers are most disgusted and exacerbated by, it's like water to a thirsty man. It's an amazing reality check. It's kind of counterintuitive because on the one hand, it is disturbing to see that these problematic patterns have survived so many decades. But for me, it's more inspiring than dispiriting. I feel like if my ancestors, who are building a better world for all of us could overcome these petty criticisms? And how much easier will it be for me and for us to do so when all I have to do to refute those criticisms is point to the words of a man like Dr. King, who they ostensibly revere so much that they have an annual birthday celebration for him. This letter is endlessly quotable. As a writer myself, as someone who knows how difficult it can be to articulate on topics so complicated, the letter feels almost like a miracle to me. I am so blown away by its eloquence and insight that it feels like I'm looking at the Grand Canyon when I read it. Just some remarkable, glorious occurrence of nature. I can't keep quoting it now. It's 8 pages long in total. Near the end, King says, "Never before have I written so long a letter. I'm afraid it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk. But what else can one do when he is alone in a narrow jail cell other than write long letters, think long thoughts, and pray long prayers?" I'm giving you only the crumbs from the feast that is King's letter. They are enough to inspire you to read or reread the letter and dive into his other writings, speeches, and sermons. But since the purpose of this talk is to reclaim Dr. King as the radical, disruptive revolutionary that he was, I will end with these last lines, which he wrote in response to his actions being labeled extreme. You'll notice that here again, King recontextualizes himself as part of a long lineage, spanning both the sacred and the secular traditions. I hope you'll excuse me ending with this longer passage, but I believe it's worth every word. King says, "I have not said to my people, get rid of your discontent. Rather, I have tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled into the creative outlet of the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. And now this approach is being termed extremist. But though I was initially disappointed at being categorized as an extremist, as I continued to think about the matter, I gradually gained a measure of satisfaction from the label. Was not Jesus an extremist for love? He said, love your enemies, bless them that curse you, do good to them that hate you, and pray for them which despitefully use you and persecute you. Was not the prophet Amos an extremist for justice? Was not Paul an extremist for the Christian gospel? Was not Martin Luther an extremist? And John Bunyan, who said, I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a butchery of my conscience. And Abraham Lincoln, who said, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. And Thomas Jefferson, who said, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists will we be? Will we be extremists for hate or for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice or the extension of justice? Perhaps the South, the nation, and the world are in dire need of creative extremists, he said. Thank you all for choosing to spend your time with us in this way today. And I encourage us all to take time today, this week, and throughout the rest of our lives to ask and re-ask ourselves, what can I do to nurture myself into Dr. King's lineage today? How can I actively participate in the lineage of creative extremists for justice today? Thank you all again so much for listening. And with that, Elijah, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Nick. Man, that was very powerful. I was excited to hear you speak. Definitely was excited.
Thank you. I'm trying to make you the host again. Sorry.
Oh, it's okay.
I'll figure that out momentarily.
Okay. But for the rest of you guys, I know he said a lot, but do you guys have any comments or questions about any of the letters or anything he said? I am the host now. Anybody? 'Cause I know he did speak a lot, so.
Hey, Nick, it's Pam.
Hey, Pam, good to see you. Well, good to hear you.
Thank you. Same here. I'm telling you, you were so awesome, and the other gentleman was so awesome. It was the best part of my day today. That and going over there and going to the art show over there at Mahogany. Could you give me the name of that speech that you're making reference to? Because it gave me goosebumps several times listening to it. It's so relevant to today and what it is that we can do. I felt so hopeless with the things that have been transpiring daily. And it's just so nice to feel hope again and recognize that that's what, rather than feel hopeless, I can feel hope for our future as a country. And so I just I got my woke t-shirt that I bought at the museum today. I need to be more woke. So can you give me the name of the speech so I can Google it, please?
Sure. Thanks so much for asking, Pam. So I'll tell you what you asked for, but then I just want to speak to what you said, because you said some, I think, some insightful things there. So what I was referencing, Terry family, I think your video is on. Reverend Terry? Oh, there we go. Somebody muted. Thank you. So the document is, it's not a speech, but the document that I was referencing is the letter from a Birmingham jail, which is one of the more famous writings of Dr. King. And like I said, it's about 8 pages long. So for someone who's just looking to learn a little bit more about like the radical extremism side of Dr. King, it's a really good place to start without having to commit to a full book. But I referenced some other speeches, but that was the main one. But the thing that I wanted to talk back to that you said was just that piece about hopelessness. And I would say, I don't think you used this word, but I think I could kind of assume like a powerlessness. This is so real in all of our lives right now. And I mean, it's partially because it is how media works, right? Like if it leads, it bleeds. We are being bombarded constantly with bad, not just bad, but like atrocious news, like traumatic news, right? We have this 24-hour news cycle that is hitting us constantly, just saying everything is falling apart and we're all doomed. So it's really hard to have hope or to feel powerful in the midst of that. And somebody that I think we talked about earlier today, Elijah and I and some others, I brought up Bryan Stevenson. Bryan Stevenson is an amazing justice worker of our day right now, contemporary. He goes around preaching sort of just 4 like main ingredients for change, but one of them, he feels that one of them is so important. All these things are so important, just 4 that he goes around. The last one he usually cites is, we have to be protective of our hope. And I actually lifted a phrase in my speech from Bryan Stevenson, because he says, when we lose hope, first of all, he says, where hopelessness persists, injustice prevails. And he also says, when we lose hope, he doesn't just say we stop being good, right? He doesn't say we become neutral. He says when we lose hope, we become agents of injustice, which is a phrase that I used in my speech. And so I'll say that about Bryan Stevenson, like how important I think this concept of refreshing ourselves and our own hope is. But then the question kind of becomes like, well, how do we do that in the face of so much trauma and nastiness. And I think one way that I always talk about is by inventorying our wins, like actively inventorying our wins. So, you know, if someone asks us like, how was your day? Usually the thing that we start with is like telling them all the things that went horribly and like complaining. If we were just like, this good thing happened and this good thing happened. And so sometimes I ask people thing that happened to you today rather than how was your day? Or like, what's the best thing that happened to you this week? But another strategy for this, I'm gonna reference Dr. King. So the Reverend Jesse Jackson, you know, a very young Jesse Jackson was with Dr. King all the time. He was with him when he was murdered, right? And he, in an interview once said, he was talking about the darkest moment he had ever seen King in. Things were just falling apart. The weight of the world was on his shoulders. You know, he was exhausted, and they were organizing in this house, and you know, they were strategizing in like the kitchen, and King just said, I have to stop. I have to stop. I'm going into the other room to pray. And the way Jackson described it, he said he prayed himself back into faith. That's an incredibly powerful phrase for me to hear, because I think typically we think of prayer being something we do in response to faith. I think it's very rare that we think that we can feed ourselves through our own words. You know, like that stuff I was talking about, like broccoli and substance, that's real, right? We can not only visit the words of our ancestors and build ourselves and sustain ourselves off of those and build ourselves back into faith and powerfulness and hope, but we can actually with our own words do that. And I don't think I really understood that until I read that interview with the Reverend Jesse Jackson. So I've certainly talked more than enough about that.
Right. Then we had a question in the chat. It said the piece on creative extremists was so relevant. Where can I find a copy?
Great question. Fortunately, it's the same answer as before. That last quote and most of the quotes that I gave in that talk are all from the letter from Birmingham jail. And you know, another great thing about the letter, this was kind of part of why I chose this for my talk. It is something you can just pull up on the internet and, you know, print off or read online, and you don't have to like even go to the library and get a book. So that's kind of handy. Though I do encourage you to go to the library and get books.
With any books that you know that are still being published, we can get those here at Mahogany Gallery as well. Any book that you can think of.
Support Black business.
Yep.
Elijah, I see something in the chat, I think from my buddy Bodie,
Okay,
that says, give us homework.
Oh yeah.
Which I just love. Whoever wrote that, I love them for it. Because that, you know, it's great to talk about amazing people who did really difficult work. It's even greater on a day like today to say, well, I mean, I guess what I was trying to encourage, how can I continue that really important, really challenging work? So I'm gonna mention just 3 things. And I'm actually, often when I talk, I'm talking like as a representative of some organization or another. I specifically chose not to do that today because I wanted to talk as openly and freely as I could, and I wanted to talk politically. One thing I would say that, you know, is something that can help. And there's really, I mean, I'm picking a few out of a ton, even in just our community. There are so many that we could talk all day about ways that you can contribute to the movement for, you know, I'll just say the movement for Black lives, the movement for justice. But one thing is, and I mentioned this earlier with Elijah, there is a bail fund that has been created in Racine recently. And some of us have been working for well over a year to get that up, but as of the 1st of this year, it is finally live, and able to accept donations. So we are collecting donations. We've got just about just under $1,000 at this point, but I did just learn of, I can't even really announce it yet because it's not totally, it's not in the bank account, I'll say, but we learned of a major donation that we're going to be getting soon. And that's good because the sooner we're able to build up this financial base of ours, the sooner we will be able to actually start administering bail and getting people out of jail. For anyone who isn't super familiar with the system of cash bail and is hearing this and being like, what's a bail fund? Like, why would this exist? Let me just put it a little bit into context. So first of all, Dr. King primarily was, and yes, I see, so I'll post a few links in the chat, including the link to the style interview and the link to the bail fund that I'm talking about. But so when Dr. King was protesting, he was largely fighting against the system of Jim Crow, which was at that time the system of maintaining racial hierarchy. Prior to that, right, Jim Crow evolved out of a different system, which was the system of slavery. So when that was legalized, it evolved. Something that exists now that didn't exist when Dr. King was alive is the new manifestation of that system, which is mass incarceration. When Dr. King was alive, like less than 300,000 people were incarcerated in the United States, and now 2.2 million people are incarcerated in the United States. And honestly, when I think about that, I think if someone had said to Dr. King, you know what, after half a century, there's going to be 2.2 million people imprisoned in cages in this country, he knew America better than anyone. I think he would have been like, no, that's too much. That's never going to happen. But here we are today with that situation. So this is the new evolution of slavery that we have to fight against today. This is the new evolution of Jim Crow that we have to work against today. And the way the cash bail system works is, say I and Elijah, if you'll forgive me, I'll use you as an example. I and Elijah are accused, not even convicted, right? Just accused of the same crime. We get arrested for the same exact crime. Say even our bail gets set at the same amount, which often isn't the case, as we know, because there are incredible racial disparities and other disparities with bail. But say our bail gets set at the same amount. This is a purely, bail is just economically based. It's not based on culpability. So if I have the economics to pay that bail, I get out that day. I stay in school if I'm in school. I keep paying my house payments. I keep working my job if I'm employed. I'm able to be with my family. I'm able to, maybe most importantly, fight my case outside of a cell, outside of a cage, like call my lawyer whenever I want, things of this nature, right? And if Elijah is not able to do that, then he fails out of school. He loses his house. He loses his job. His life is destroyed, and it's only because he didn't have the economics. Our system is totally economically based for cash bail. So that's what we're trying to do by creating this bail fund, is just bring more equity to that. Hopefully, in the long term, we'll be able to reform the cash bail system or abolish it. But in the meantime, we're subverting the system in this way. So I'll post that link in a second. The two other things that I'll say, and I'll say these much more quickly, is, getting politically, Dr. King didn't really talk about like individual racism very much. He didn't really care about that in terms of what he wrote about or spoke about. Like, he knew it existed, but it wasn't his main concern. He cared about systemic issues. He cared about systems that created widespread inequities, both racially and economically, and militaristically, as Aaron said earlier. So what that means is we have to, if we're going to do the same thing, we have to concern ourselves with those systems. And pretty much all of those systems are based in government. And our government is run electorally. So if we're not involved and talking actively and working actively in electoral politics, then we're really not like approaching systems work probably for the most part. And we're not, we're not aptly getting into King's legacy in the way we might want to be. So if you're in Racine or Kenosha, just two things that I'll mention regarding that. One, a woman who I think is on the call named Ontavia Jackson is running for school board right now. And if you're not in her district, you can't vote for her, but that doesn't matter. People can contribute to campaigns in all sorts of ways, whether it's by volunteering, whether it's by donating, whether it's by sharing, going on her page and liking it on Facebook, and I'll send out that link also. But just to be clear, RUSD, the Racine Unified School District, it's what you might call a majority minority school. We have more students of color than we do white students. And our Board of Education is completely white at this point. So Ontavia could be the first person of color, I very much hope is the first person of color to get elected to that board right now anyways. And the last thing I'll say about that is I'm not just interested in getting some random person of color elected. Ontavia also has a demonstrated history of working for anti-racist policies and working for policies of justice. So that's why I'm so eager to support her. But if you're not in Racine, maybe you're in Kenosha, there's another Black woman, Angela Cunningham, who is running for judge right now. I don't know what the landscape is like in Kenosha, but I know in Racine, there are no judges of color currently. So again, this is someone who is not just, someone who can bring representation, diverse representation to the role, but someone who has a demonstrated history of fighting for justice, of fighting for those who are most vulnerable among us. So again, I'll post those links in the chat right now. Please go on their Facebook pages, like them, reach out if you want to volunteer, donate money if you can, and spread word to your friends about, if you're supporting them and why.
Thank you so much. And it's, for me being as young as I am, it's very beautiful seeing all these very powerful people and be able to have conversations with you guys and just learn so much from you guys. So I really thank you for everybody that coming in and the speakers today. And I know a few of the people you spoke on, they're in here. If you guys had anything you guys wanted to add to the conversation or about what you guys are doing, I would love to hear from you guys too as well.
Agreed. Great call, Elijah. Yeah, if Ontavia or Angela or anyone else would like to take the moment, I mean, everyone in this virtual room is in the work pretty much. So I know Carmen recently, started a new excellent organization just called Black in Racine. So if anyone wants to talk about the work that they're doing, I think this would be a great time for me even to get to hear that.
I can speak. I just want to, I don't have a big spiel or anything. I definitely want to extend my thank yous for shouting me out, and then also for everyone who is supporting me, whether it be with kind words, donations, whatever way you are supporting, I appreciate that. I spent most of my morning in a Zoom this morning with Public Allies, and we were talking about the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And we were talking about it in the way in which whiteness has taken over, and the way in which we don't talk about him normally, right? The radical side of him. And it was really, really an amazing thing. I have posted it on Facebook. I did post a clip on my Facebook page. So if you are friends with me and you have the opportunity, one of our young allies, Thomas Leonard, actually did our opening speech, and he had us in tears. Like, he shaped the day. I am really proud of our allies. I am very fortunate to be able to bring public allies to Racine and Kenosha also, so we can continue to do this work right here in our neighborhoods. And thank you for your support, like I said, in every way. I appreciate it.
Thanks for stepping up for the whole community, Auntie.
Thank you. Anyone else? Because I know he said a lot of you guys are in the work, a lot of stuff, and a lot of different things I'm interested in. So I'm definitely looking forward to hear what you guys have to say and the different organizations you guys are a part of. So a lot of these I'm hearing for the first time, so very eye-opening.
It looks like I screwed up the bail fund link, so I will resend that right now. Feel free, because this chat will disappear when we close it out, feel free to copy it and put it on your own computer. And before anyone else talks, I just want to say I'm noticing right now that my 11-year-old and 8-year-old nephew and niece are on this call, and I'm so excited to see them. I love those monsters. They are true radicals.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yep.
Oh, okay. Well, my name is Pearl Terry. I just want to say to Nick, great job. And I want to thank him very much. Thank him for his participation. That was a stellar performance. And thank you very much. Very enlightening, very informational. And so one of these days, I'm going to be a great speaker like you and great writer as well. Okay.
Nick, can you hear me?
Yes, Reverend Terry.
Yeah, I would like to concur with what she just said, but my question, I guess, is, do you feel that African Americans need another Martin Luther King today?
Or do we have?
Or do we have one? Or do we need one?
That's a great question, Reverend Terry. Thank you for bringing it up. We kind of talked a little bit, Elijah and I and some others talked about it a little bit towards the beginning of the day, towards noon. So before I answer it, let me just say the Terry family has made an incredible mark in terms of justice workers and in terms of lineage on this community. So it means, the world to hear you saying kind things to me about it. Thank you. Because you're certainly, we're talking about an ancestor, Dr. King, today, but our elders are the other incredibly important link in that chain. So thank you for being elders that I can look up to. So what I would say about the question, do we need another Dr. Martin Luther King today? I spoke earlier and said, Ontavia put in the chat, yes, we need many. I love that. I think there is always an impulse to romanticize the past and just to see it as better than whatever the present is, right? And as, no one will say more romantic things about Dr. King than I, right? Like I said, reading his writings feels like looking at the Grand Canyon to me, and it really does. Like, it is utterly awe-inspiring to me. They're like spiritual experiences to me. But having said that, I think we would just be misguiding. Oh, can you all hear me still?
Yes, I can, yes.
I think we would be misguiding ourselves if we weren't taking, weren't refreshing ourselves, like I said earlier, in the inventory of the incredible justice workers that we have today. So I don't know that we necessarily need another Martin Luther King Jr., but we absolutely need an Elijah Evans who's here with us. We absolutely need an Ontavia Jackson and an Angela Cunningham and a Carmen Ayers. And on, on maybe like, so that's the local level, right? On the national level, we need a Brian Stevenson, like I mentioned before. We need a Dr. Michelle Alexander. We need a DeRay McKesson. And there's sort of endless names that I mean, in Milwaukee, we need an Angela Lang, right? Someone who started what's called the Black Mamas Bailout. So this is every Mother's Day annually. There's a huge effort to raise funds and bail Black mothers out of jail. And the woman who started that, who is an amazing community organizer in Atlanta, she's from Racine. Her name is Mary Hooks. Very few people know that. Another person from Racine, a Black trans activist, whose name is Angelica, what is it? Angelica Ross. My wife just ran support on that one. Also from Racine, right? Doing incredible work. So I think sometimes, these are just not things, we're not going to like see these people on billboards. It's very rare that we're going to, see television shows about them or things like that. These are only people whose work we're going to learn about from like actively seeking it out. So I guess that's my answer. I don't think we necessarily need a new Dr. King, but we definitely need to continue the lineage. And fortunately, there are a ton of people continuing that lineage. I would say the thing that we do need to do is we need to help lift those people's work and messages up more and more every day, not just on Dr. King.
I would say that more people continuing his work. Would that be the proper thing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's perfect, Reverend Terry. And in fact, I'll bring another contemporary up, Reverend Barber, who is so clearly in Dr. King's lineage. Dr. King died when he was running the Poor People's Campaign, and Reverend Barber now is one of the leaders of the Poor People's Campaign. But my wife showed me a clip of Reverend Barber, who's just an amazing organizer and orator and prophet, I would say, like Dr. King. But he said, prophets trouble us all. You don't honor a prophet with a celebration. You honor a prophet by going to the place where they were killed, reaching down into the blood, picking up what they were working on and carrying it the next mile. And that has really stuck with me this Dr. King Day.
Wow, that's deep.
We were talking about school, no one on the school board. I can remember, I'm not sure if when this happened was voter suppression or what, when they went to districts, 9 districts, getting school board members. Prior to that time, I can remember when we had 2 African Americans on the school board. When I came here in 72, we had 1. But since they shift, it's hard for us to get 1. Was that done to eliminate that? Why was that done? I think it was a voter suppression.
I would simply agree with you 100% on that, Reverend Terry. I think that was two things basically. If you want to not look at it through a racial lens, you could say that was the Republican leadership of our state assembly of Wisconsin trying to make sure that less people from the city were able to get voted in specifically. But the other part of that is it basically works the same as how gerrymandering works. And I know not everyone knows how gerrymandering works, which is another sophisticated kind of voter suppression. But it cracks apart the Black vote. when we were able to all vote for, whichever candidates we wanted, when we weren't broken into districts, Black people could focus their votes all together on one or two candidates. And because we were districted in that way, it broke apart all of those Black votes so that it was weakened. So I think you're bringing up an absolutely great point, and one that not a lot of people know that much about here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick. But yeah, that will be concluding for today. I want to wish everyone a great MLK Day and continue to have these discussions. And you can also email Scott or email me. I can put my email in the chat and we can try to have some more of these, because I can see that there's brought up a lot of conversation, a lot of deep thinking after a conversation like this, and it's only going to get better from here. Only supposed to go up from here. So I'll definitely put my email in there as well. Then you can check the website and the Facebook page to continue to talk with Scott. And does anyone else have any questions before we wrap it up?
I just want to say thanks again to you, Elijah, and to Scott, and to all the organizers who made this event possible.
Welcome. Okay. All right. My email. Oh, what was that? Oh, Scott, did you want to say something?
Thank you to everyone who has participated today. Thank you to the speakers, and thank you for celebrating second annual MLK.
Pretty much it.
Yeah, service.
No, I was gonna see you can come over here because I think you're muted.
Oh,
Yeah, you might as well just come sit on here.
just going to do it.
Yeah.
All right, there I am. Okay, guys, I just wanted to say thank you to everyone who participated throughout the day. Thank you to all of our speakers. And thank you for being a part of this momentous occasion for all of us, for this whole community. You know, when we talk about, Dr. King, we talk about it's important for us to continue the acknowledging the work that he did and continue the legacy for our young people. So this is one of the main reasons why we do this event here at Mahogany Gallery, because it keeps his legacy and his traditions and his history alive for our younger people, but it also gives us an opportunity for us more seasoned individuals to engage in dialogue and provide opportunities and to discuss amongst ourselves and continue to educate one another. So I just can't thank everyone enough, and I really appreciate everybody's feedback and input. And thank you again. And we'll be back next year. So we hope to see you again. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, y'all. Great seeing you all. Love you. Happy MLK Day. Love you, family.